Wood is a marvellous material to work with and produce articles of beauty or utility. Once you begin to work with wood, you soon get the feel of its lovely natural texture and the beautiful smells so typical of a woodworker's shop. In the old days, it took years of practice and toil to reach a high standard. But today, modern machine tools will help you to produce lovely work, whether you do it for business or whether you do it for pleasure. Of all the machines available to the woodworker today, the portable router is probably the most versatile. Many people purchase routers and leave them in their boxes, mainly because, well, frankly, they're afraid of them. They find them noisy, probably a bit dusty. But during the course of this video, we hope to overcome all those fears and instruct you on how to use the router safely and confidently. I myself have been using routers for nearly 30 years, and during the course of this video, I hope to impart to you some of the knowledge that I've gained over that time. Of course, the most important aspect of using any power tool is safety, and we should be going into that very thoroughly so that you can use your router with safety and confidence. Now, the main features of routing are that the router can be used in two ways. It can be used either as a fully portable machine, handheld, or it can be fixed to a stand where it becomes a mini spindle moulder or an overhead router. Now, the earliest routers were fixed base. This is a typical example of an early type of router. They were extremely useful. They could be used for grooving, and they were in fact a godsend, particularly for people who were making stairs or anything of that nature. But they are limited as compared with the more modern plunging type. The next came the plunging router, and this is an early model. Very, very powerful, 2,000 watts, plunge action. Obviously, one of the advantages being that you could tuck your cutter back out of the way at the completion of the cut, which made it a good deal safer than the fixed base model. Then we come to the more modern machine. This is electronic router, powerful again, 1,800 watts, nice plunge action. Again, with all the advantages of being able to tuck your cutter back out of the way at the completion of the cut. Now, its smaller brother, 750 watts. This particular one fitted with a dust extraction pipe to it, which you'll be seeing again later in the video. And there she is on her own, again with a nice plunge action, locking off with the handle. Now, this is the most sophisticated model in the range. An 1,800 watt router with several unique features. It's got a spindle lock, which together with the hexagonal nut here makes the removal and insertion of cutters very, very much easier. There's an automatically quick release depth stop, and the plunge action has been greatly improved, making it easy to plunge and lock. Plunge and lock. Now, the smaller 750 watt routers are suitable for lighter cuts, such as, well, this edge mould is a typical example of the type of cut that the 750 watt router can comfortably cope with. Should you need larger and heavier cuts, then obviously a bigger machine will be necessary. So, for example, this rebate, you'd need a machine of at least this capacity. Right now, let's have a look at the router in some detail. And as most people will start with a small to medium-sized router, we will start with this 750 watt model, which incidentally has variable speed, being an electronic job. Now, when you purchase a router, a decent quality router, you can reasonably expect to get at least the following accessories. a side fence, about which more later, a guide bush for template routing, and a pair of spanners for skewing your cutters. In a case of this machine, the locking, the positive downward locking when you plunge it, is controlled by the side knob there, the handle. Plunge and lock. The actual depth is controlled by this stop here, which may be raised or lowered to suit whichever depth you happen to be routing. And a variable depth stop here, a 3-position turret stop, is fitted to enable one to route at various depths. The collet, which holds the cutter, in the case of this machine 1/4-inch shank cutters, is fitted to the end of the motor shaft there. Finally, the guide bush is secured to the base of the router with a couple of countersunk screws. We shall go into greater detail about guide bushes at a later time. There are a couple of useful accessories available for this machine, and they're both concerned with the fine adjustment. There's a vertical fine adjuster and a lateral adjuster. The lateral adjuster fits to the side fence and enables this fence to be adjusted to very, very fine limits, most useful facility, whereas the vertical adjuster fits here in place of the depth stop and engages in the long screw in the turret. Of course, this cuts out the plunge, but it does enable the height, again, to be adjusted within very fine limits. Now, we've dealt in general with the router and his accessories, and now we're going to deal with a very important part of the machine, and that is the collet. Now, the collet comprises of 2 parts, the collet itself and the collet nut, and it's important that they are assembled like that before they're placed into the machine. There are several sizes of collet available. That's a 1/4-inch one, and there's a 1/2-inch one. They are, of course, for a larger router than this machine. The cutter is placed into the collet at least 3/4 of its shank length and tightened firmly. Now, it must be stressed that you do not over-tighten it. You just tighten it firmly, and you'll avoid this sort of thing happening. That's caused through over-tightening, excessive scoring of the shaft of the cutter. And then when you take your cutter out, don't chuck it in a tin box. Put it in a rack like that so that it's maintained in good condition. Now, just a brief word about maintenance. Well, virtually there isn't any. It's only necessary possibly just to lightly oil the slides to give yourself a nice smooth plunge action. And of course, examine your leads for chafing or signs of wear, and the plug for any signs of damage. And that's about it. Right, now we're going to talk a bit about cutters. As you can see, there's a large number available, from the very simplest 2-flute cutters here for grooving and rebating and that type of work, through to roller cutters, self-guiding cutters, cutters for special shapes, cutters for panel, heavy cutters for panel raising, fielding, right up to cutters for profiling and manufacturing doors. Terrific range available. There's even now cutters with inserted blades for heavy production work. Now, as far as cutter types are concerned, there are 2 main types available. There are high-speed steel or tungsten carbide tipped. Now, high-speed steel cutters are quite suitable for softwoods and light hardwoods. They're adequate. But when it comes to the more abrasive timbers, such as teak or afromosia, or any heavy timbers like oak, which will subject the cutter to excessive wear, tungsten carbide tipped cutters are absolutely necessary, as they are for any man-made board. MDF, chipboard, plywood, any of the man-made boards need tungsten carbide tipped cutters. Now, as far as keeping cutters in condition is concerned, one can hone them lightly, and in the case of high-speed steel cutters, just use a carborundum or similar stick, a fine to medium carborundum, and hone them up on the inside face only, not on the shaped face. On the inside face, just lightly hone them with a little drop of oil. Now, tungsten carbide is a slightly different proposition. Tungsten is extremely hard, and the only material that will really touch it is a diamond impregnated slurry. So there is a slate available onto which you spray a little of the slurry on one edge, and again, just using the inside of the cutter, not the outside face, just the inside face of the cutter, you gently rub it up and down the slate, and that will maintain your cutter in reasonably good condition. It must be stressed, though, that once you let a cutter get dull, no amount of honing will restore it to its original condition. One then has to send it away and have it professionally sharpened. Now, the next important aspect of routing we've got to consider is fixing your work to the bench. The short answer is that you don't. You supply yourself with a suitable board. This one's made of chipboard, which you can slot onto the bench, and onto which you can safely nail anything you wish, either strips, jigs or anything else. I'm doing a simple fixing here with 4 strips of plywood. Stick the 4th one on, and that's secure for that particular routing operation. An alternative is this workshop-made jig, if you're interested in making accessories for yourself. It works with a cam action like that and is secured underneath with wing nuts. That's a good way of holding stuff without damaging the outside edges. The third alternative is the use of toggle clamps. These toggle clamps will secure work for edge moulding thus. They're a very, very useful item to have in your routing kit. There's also the use of double-sided tape. It's a very useful thing for securing small pieces, and of course various types of clamps. Right, now we're ready to start routing, except for one very important aspect, and this aspect is safety. Now, safety falls into 2 categories: a safe machine and personal safety. As far as a safe machine is concerned, probably the first important thing is a sharp cutter. Blunt cutters give you a poor finish, they're difficult to use, and in all ways they're unsatisfactory, so make sure always that your cutters are sharp. Furthermore, make sure always that your machine is switched into the off position before you plug it into the main, that your knobs here are kept tight. Any knobs that are not actually in use are kept in the tight position. And finally, never under any circumstances plug a router in until you have completely finished all the necessary adjustments to the cutting area. Now, as far as personal protection is concerned, by far the most important thing are the eyes. There are more accidents caused industrially to eyes than probably any other part of the body, so you must make sure your eyes are protected. Many people use goggles. Personally, I prefer a visor which fits comfortably over the head, like that. It'll be pushed back out of the way when you're not using it. As far as ear protection is concerned, in a noisy environment, it's advisable to use ear defenders. And for dust, protection against dust, a light dust mask of suitable grade. Better than a dust mask is dust extraction unit fitted to the actual router. Right, now we're all kitted up for safety, and we can now proceed to our first operation. Now the first job we're going to do is a simple rebate using the side fence. You'll note the use of the extended fence, which enables you to produce a smooth cut right up to the end without jumping. The cutter we're going to use is a 19mm diameter with a 25mm depth of cut. Now the next job we've got to do is set the depth of cut. Plunge the cutter down onto the job and use the scale provided, although I use feeler gauges I've made in the workshop. Drop the depth stop down onto the gauge, release, and we're ready with the depth stop set. Check the knobs for tightness and that the router is switched off. Then you pull on your safety gear. Plug in, and you're ready to go. And the result is a smooth, clean rebate. If you wish to make a deeper rebate, particularly with a lower powered router, it's always advisable to make several passes. Now that may look simple, but just a few tips for those new to routing. Firstly, always practice on waste material until you gain confidence. Plunge the router cleanly and feed smoothly and not too slowly. And finally, don't be disappointed if your first few attempts are not satisfactory. We're now going to show you some work involving the use of guide bushes. There's a range of guide bushes available, small ones for intricate work and larger sizes to accommodate large cutters. There's a special base plate available which will enable you to fit these particular guide bushes to any make of router. I'm now going to do some jobs involving the use of guide bushes. Right, now the first job we do involving the use of the guide bush is a cross-grained housing joint. We fitted the router with a 24mm guide bush and a 19mm cutter. The job has been fitted with a workshop-made T-square, 90 degrees. It was secured with a G-clamp. And our first job is to set the depth of cut on the router. The router is plunged to its fullest extent, locked off, and the appropriate feeler inserted, in this case a 6mm. The depth stop is dropped and locked off, and the plunge released. Then we check the router, making sure that all the knobs are tight, that the switch is off, in the off position, and then we get ourselves ready. Visor down, earmuffs on, and finally plug in. It looks a nice clean cut. Let's see how it fits. Now the next job we're going to do is cutting an aperture for a fitment, in this case a plastic handle. A jig has already been constructed. You will notice that the size is larger than the actual size of the fitment itself, to accommodate the difference between the size of the guide bush and the cutter. We are using the same combination as before, a 24mm guide bush and a 19mm cutter. Then we check the router for safety, knobs tight and switch off. And the resultant cut gives a snug fitting handle. Right, we're now going to form a decorative panel using a suitable jig, and the jig is mounted in the work holding table. We're still using a 24mm guide bush in the router, but this time we're using a decorative cutter, in fact a small ovolo. Now the router has been preset, the safety checks have been carried out, so all that remains is to do the job. And go. Note the direction of feed. I'll tell you more about this later. And the resultant cut is a neatly formed panel. We're now going to deal with operations which feature self-guiding cutters. Now there are two types of self-guiding cutter. There's the roller type or the type with the guide pin. Roller cutters give you a better finish generally, but pin cutters will give you a neater corner. In our case here we're going to use the roller type to form a rebate in a sash. Now an important thing when you're cutting is the direction of feed. Clockwise for internal cuts, and anti-clockwise for external cuts. The diagram will illustrate the point. Now we're ready to go. The router has been preset, all the safety checks have been carried out. The work is secured to the baseboard, so all we have to do is make the cut. Notice that I retracted the cutter at the end of the cut, and we seem to have achieved a nice sharp rebate. Right, now we're going to do an operation involving the use of a cutter with a guide pin. This is a typical guide pin cutter. We should be using a similar one when we make the cut. The router has been preset, all the safety checks have been carried out, so we're ready to go. and the resultant cut is a clean moulding. Now the next job we're going to do is a simple mortise. The router has been fitted with 2 side fences and a suitable 2-flute cutter. I shall route it in both directions to ensure that the cut is central. At the commencement of the cut, we bore a hole at either end, a location hole at either end, and then clear the middle out with a series of shallow passes. Safety checks have been done on the router, so we're ready to go. Note that the mortise has rounded ends which will of course need squaring off. Now we've made our mortise and the next job is to make the tenon to suit. I've marked the timber with a suitable mark on the end there. Now tenoning is not a particularly easy job with the router, so I've constructed this jig. It consists of a hinged flap, a running board mounted on a baseboard. The timber is placed in the jig, a suitable spacing piece inserted, and the work secured with a cramp. We are now ready to make the tenon. A little application of candle grease on the runners. The machine has been fitted with a 24mm guide bush and a suitable 2-flute cutter. All the safety checks have been made. You will notice that as there is no dust extraction fitted to the router, I'm wearing a dust mask. The final result is a well-fitting joint. Right, now we're now going to run through a few typical jobs, starting with laminate trimming. I'm using a roller bearing cutter of suitable size. Up to now, we've used the router handheld. Now we're going to use it as a fixed machine. We're now going to see the router as a miniature spindle moulder. The router is mounted on a commercial stand over which I've placed this specially made table. The material is mounted in a jig with a special shaped end like that and held by two toggle clamps. The cutter is a profile cutter with a bearing at the bottom. This special block here is to prevent an initial kick at the start of the cut. The result is a smooth cut. Right, we're now going to introduce work using the copy follower. We've fitted a shaped cutter to the machine and we're going to work a mould on the edge of the piece that we have just trimmed. The height of the cutter is adjusted with this fine adjuster, which can also be used when the router is handheld, for instance when dovetailing. I shall make the cut end grain first to avoid breakout. Now the next job we're going to do, using the same setup, is to put a mould on the edge of the box lid. We are now going to cut open the lid of the box that we have just moulded. We're using a 1.5mm slitting cutter in an arbor. You will notice that the speed of the motor has been slightly reduced to compensate for the larger cutter. At the end of the cut, I shall insert a piece of plywood in the cut to lift the box clear. Finally, we're going to do a job involving the use of the trammel bar. It is in fact a small breadboard, and the first job will be to smooth the edge. The router is fitted with a trammel bar, and the work is secured with double-sided tape. A 2-flute cutter is employed for this particular job. And the result is a smoothly finished board. Next, we're going to put a moulded edge on the prepared board. I've attached a special baseboard to the router, which I have designed to stabilise the cut, and we have a shaped cutter to form the mould. Finally, we're going to introduce a groove, a decorative groove into the board using a cove cutter. You will notice as I draw back slightly when I change hands to avoid burning. A little touch of glass paper will finish the job. And that concludes basic routing. There's a further video available on advanced techniques. Now remember, safety is most important. Always keep to all the regulations in force in your particular area. A couple of points too: keep your cutters sharp and never overload a router. And finally, happy routing.